Have you ever felt like no matter how much you achieve, collect, or prove, something inside you still whispers, "This isn't it"? That whisper, that ache is not failure. It's the beginning. Because real transformation doesn't start when you finally get everything you've been told to chase. It begins the moment you let go of what you were never meant to carry. We've been conditioned to believe that becoming more means adding more. More goals, more validation, more masks. But the truth, the most profound transformation doesn't come from addition, it comes from subtraction. It's not about improving the performance. It's about burning the script altogether. It's the death of everything false so that something real can finally live. Carl Jung called this process individuation, but let's speak plainly. It's the death of the ego image you thought you had to be, and in that death, the self is born, not a new version of you. The true you. The one who existed before the world told you who to become. But here's the thing no one tells you. Ego death isn't loud. It doesn't come with fireworks or applause. It comes in silence, in collapse, in those moments when life strips you of every role, title, and illusion, and all you're left with is yourself. That's when the real work begins. That's when the self starts to emerge not as a performance, but as a presence. This is not a breakdown. It's a breakthrough. The most powerful version of you is not the one who controls everything, it's the one who no longer needs to. Because when the ego dies, you don't disappear, you finally appear, and that changes everything. This is the death that gives life. Let's get honest. The ego isn't the villain, it's the mask. It's the story you've been repeating your whole life about who you are, what you're worth, and how far you're allowed to go. It's not evil. It's just limited, and most of us don't even realize how tightly we're holding onto it until life pulls it away. Carl Jung described the ego as the center of conscious identity, the I that you believe yourself to be. But here's the truth. It's a costume stitched together from childhood roles, cultural scripts, and survival strategies. It tells you what to say to be loved, how to behave to be accepted, when to stay silent so you don't get abandoned. And it works for a while. It keeps you safe, it keeps you praised, it even helps you succeed, but it comes with a price. Because the more you identify with the mask, the more you forget what's underneath it. The ego wants clarity, control, and certainty, but the soul, it wants truth. That's why suffering begins when you start mistaking the mask for the face. You think you're the job, the status, the relationship, the opinions others hold of you. And when any of that breaks, so do you. Not because you're broken, but because you built your identity on something fragile. The ego isn't just a voice in your head, it's the tension in your chest when you think you're not enough. It's the fear that you'll be rejected if you show who you really are. It's the constant striving to be someone, because being yourself never felt like it was enough. But let this sink in. The ego can't love, it can only perform, it can't connect, it can only protect. And as long as you let it run the show, you'll keep missing the parts of yourself that are real. That's why ego death isn't destruction, it's liberation. It's the moment you stop living to maintain an image and start living from your essence. You were never meant to be a role, you were born to be real. And that begins the moment you stop clinging to the story and start listening to the soul beneath it. The ego loves control. It clings to it like a lifeline, convinced that if it just holds on tight enough, it can keep life from slipping through its fingers. It builds routines, plans, expectations, all in an effort to avoid chaos, avoid pain, avoid uncertainty. But here's the truth that cuts deep. Control is a beautiful lie. We don't steer the river, we just learn how to float. But the ego can't float. It resists, it tightens, it tries to swim upstream against currents it can't see. That resistance, it shows up as anxiety, as burnout, as the quiet panic behind your smile. It's the inner war between who you are and who you're trying to hold together. And here's the most painful part: validation becomes your oxygen. The ego doesn't just want to survive. It wants to be seen, applauded, chosen. It thrives on the illusion that if you're just perfect enough, prepared enough, praised enough, then maybe, just maybe, you'll finally feel safe. But safety bought with control is temporary. It doesn't nourish, it starves. The fear of the unknown is the ego's biggest threat, not because it's dangerous, but because it can't be managed. And what the ego can't manage, it calls a problem. That's why it clings to what's familiar, even if it hurts. That's why it says, "At least I know this pain." It would rather suffer with certainty than heal in mystery. But the soul doesn't need guarantees. It doesn't ask for a map. It asks for trust. And trust begins where control ends. So ask yourself gently, what are you trying to hold together that was meant to fall apart? What illusion are you keeping alive just to feel safe? The river is already flowing. Maybe it's time to stop paddling and let it carry you to where you were meant to be all along. No one wakes up one day and says, "Today, I'll shatter." But life has a way of breaking the ego exactly when it refuses to bend. You lose the job, the relationship ends. The betrayal you never expected comes, the health scare, the grief, the silence that follows, and suddenly, everything you thought you were collapses. That moment, the one that feels like an end, is not punishment, it's invitation. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And that's what breaking does. It lifts the veil. It shows you what's been silently steering your life all along, your fear, your wounds, your hidden stories. The ego sees trauma, heartbreak, or failure as evidence that you're falling apart, but the self sees it as an awakening, because the mask only breaks when it can no longer contain the truth beneath it. These dark nights of the soul are sacred. They strip you of everything, false everything you clung to for identity, and leave you face to face with who you really are without the costume. And in that terrifying stillness, something ancient begins to stir, not a version of you polished for approval, but the raw, unfiltered presence of your true self. Yes, it hurts. Yes, it's messy. But that breakdown? It's not the end, it's the doorway. Think about it. Has anything truly life-changing ever come from comfort? Or has it always been born in those moments where you had no choice but to change? The ego wants to go back to how things were. The soul knows there's no going back, only going deeper. So if you find yourself breaking, let it. Don't rush to rebuild. Don't fill the silence. Just be still. Because what feels like the end is really the beginning of your return to wholeness, to truth, to the self that's been waiting for you underneath it all. There comes a moment where everything you've built, every plan, every identity, every illusion crumbles, and not quietly. It crashes. Suddenly, the things you used to rely on no longer make sense. Your motivation fades, your beliefs feel empty, you look in the mirror and don't recognize who's looking back. That moment? It feels like falling, like free-falling through a sky with no ground in sight. But here's the truth no one tells you. The fall is the beginning. Because until you fall, you're still trying to hold on, still trying to climb, perform, prove, still trying to keep the ego alive. But eventually, your grip gives out, not because you're weak, but because life loves you too much to let you keep lying to yourself. Letting go feels like death, and in a way, it is. The ego thinks it's dying because it is. It's losing control, losing the image it curated, losing the story it wrote and rewrote to keep itself feeling important. But beneath that grief is freedom. The paradox? In surrender, we find strength. Not the strength to keep climbing, but the strength to finally stop, to rest, to breathe without pretending. To fall, not into emptiness, but into your own soul. This is where something ancient in you begins to rise, not a version shaped by fear, but a presence shaped by truth. You realize the fall didn't destroy you, it stripped you. And now, naked and real, you stand on ground more solid than any illusion you once built. You thought you were breaking, but you were breaking open. There's a part of you you've been avoiding your whole life, not because it's evil, but because it's uncomfortable. It's the version of you that carries rage, jealousy, shame, insecurity. The you that wasn't allowed to speak, that was told to quiet down, smile, behave. That part is called the shadow. Carl Jung called the shadow the unknown dark side of the personality, not because it's bad, but because it's buried, denied, rejected, and anything we deny in ourselves doesn't disappear, it grows in silence. It waits. The ego avoids the shadow at all costs. It wants to appear good, liked, acceptable. But the self, the deeper, you knows that wholeness doesn't come from being perfect. It comes from being real. And real means integrated, not just your light, but your dark too. Transformation doesn't begin when you fix yourself. It begins when you face yourself, when you stop running from your anger and instead ask what it's been trying to protect. When you stop hiding your sadness and start honoring the wound beneath it. When you look your shadow in the eye and say, I see you, you're part of me too. This is the beginning of real power, because what you've been calling weakness might actually be your deepest wisdom misinterpreted. Your anger might be your boundary. Your sadness might be your truth. Your fear might be your compass. But first you have to meet the part of you you've tried to exile. It's not an easy meeting, but it's a necessary one, because you can't become whole by choosing only the parts of you that look good in the light. Wholeness is forged in the dark, not in denial, but in embrace. The shadow isn't your enemy. It's your forgotten teacher, and it's been waiting not to ruin you, but to remind you who you are when you stop hiding. Have you ever met someone who instantly rubbed you the wrong way? No explanation, no logic, just a deep, visceral reaction. It's not them, it's what they're reflecting. Because people don't just walk into your life randomly, they show up as mirrors for the parts of you you've tried to forget. This is what Jung meant when he said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. You think it's the arrogance that bothers you, but maybe it's your buried hunger for confidence. You say they're too emotional, but maybe you've disowned your own need to feel. You call someone needy, but maybe deep down, you're starving for connection. This is projection of the ego's favorite defense mechanisms. Instead of facing the shadow, the ego pushes it out and paints it onto someone else. It's easier to judge a stranger than admit, that's me too. But here's the truth. You will never transform what you're still blaming. The moment you stop pointing the finger and start holding the mirror is the moment you reclaim your power. Because now, you're no longer a prisoner of your reactions, you're the observer. And observation is the beginning of consciousness. The mask the ego wears is designed to protect, but the mirror life offers is designed to reveal. It shows you what's unresolved. It shows you who you still need to meet inside yourself. So the next time someone triggers you, don't ask, what's wrong with them? Ask, what are they waking up in me? That shift, that single question is the beginning of freedom, because now, instead of hiding from the shadow, you're learning from it, and that's when the real transformation begins. It doesn't start with fireworks, it starts with confusion. One day, the life you built no longer fits. The dreams you chased feel hollow. The titles you wore start to itch. You look around and wonder, who was I doing all this for? That's not failure. That's the ego beginning to die. And it feels like a free fall. You lose your sense of identity. The roles you played dissolve. Your ambitions blur. You're not sure who you are without the performance, and that, right there, is the doorway. Carl Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, but no one tells you that the path to that self requires you to burn down the false one first. This is ego death, the unraveling of everything you thought defined you, and it's terrifying, because the ego equates loss with death. But the soul knows better. The soul doesn't want more. It wants truth. And sometimes truth doesn't come in a revelation, it comes in a collapse. You feel lost, not because you failed, but because you're finally being emptied of what isn't yours. You're shedding everything that was built for approval, survival, performance. And what's left? Silence, stillness, space. And in that space, something begins to stir. Not ambition, not achievement, but awareness. You stop chasing, you start listening, you stop performing, you start being. And from that being, a new identity begins to form, not constructed, but uncovered. You're not becoming someone else. You're remembering who you were before the world taught you to forget. This is the spiritual rebirth, the soul awakening, and it doesn't arrive with applause, it arrives with presence. You are not dying. You are being born. There's a point on the path where everything goes quiet. The calls stop, the invitations fade, even the noise in your mind begins to slow, and at first it feels like abandonment, but it's not. It's initiation. Transformation needs silence, because the soul does not scream, it whispers, and you cannot hear it when you're surrounded by the constant static of doing, pleasing, and performing. So life quiets you, it pulls you back, it removes what distracts, and suddenly you're alone, not lonely alone, alone with your thoughts, your feelings, your unfiltered truth. This stillness isn't empty, it's sacred. It's the womb of your rebirth, the place where the ego's noise fades and the self begins to speak, but that voice is subtle. It doesn't compete for your attention. It waits, patiently, quietly, until you're still enough to listen. We live in a world addicted to stimulation, every moment filled with screens, sounds, notifications, distractions, so when silence comes, it feels foreign, even threatening. But only in silence can you finally meet the parts of yourself you've ignored. Stillness isn't the absence of life, it's the presence of awareness. And in that awareness, you begin to hear your own wisdom again, not the voice of fear, not the inner critic, but the voice that says, you're already enough. This is why solitude is often the rite of passage for the soul, not because you're being punished, but because you're being prepared to lead from within, not follow the noise around you. In the quiet, you'll find your compass. In the stillness, your center. And in the solitude, you'll realize you were never alone. You were just finally with yourself. The world loves extremes. Be perfect or be nothing. Be strong or be broken. Be the light or be the shadow. But transformation doesn't live in extremes. It lives in integration. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the path of becoming whole, not by choosing parts of yourself, but by embracing all of yourself. You are not just your light, you are also your dark. You are not just your clarity, you are also your confusion. And real freedom begins the moment you stop picking sides and start holding space for the whole truth. The ego divides. It says, this is acceptable, this is not. It labels some emotions as good, others as shameful. It rewards performance and hides vulnerability. But the self? The self welcomes everything to the table. Anger, fear, love, doubt, it's all part of the story. You don't heal by cutting off the parts of you that hurt. You heal by listening to them, letting them speak, letting them rest, because what you suppress owns you, but what you embrace transforms you. Perfection is the ego's game. Authenticity is the self's revolution. And authenticity means you show up with all your colors, not just the ones that look good in the light. Integration is messy. It's not a clean process. It doesn't happen in one breakthrough moment. It happens slowly, in your choices, in your pauses, in how you forgive yourself on the days you fall back into old patterns. Because growth is not linear, it spirals, it deepens. To integrate is to stop pretending you are either or and, start honoring that you are both and. You are both the wound and the healer, the question and the answer, the storm and the calm. And once you can hold all of it, without shame, without denial, that's when you become whole. And wholeness is not about arriving, it's about returning back to the self that never needed fixing, only remembering. There comes a moment quiet, subtle, when something shifts. You don't announce it, you don't even fully understand it, but suddenly, you're no longer trying to be someone, you're just being yourself. Not the version others approve of, not the one you've curated, the real one. This is when the self begins to take the lead. It doesn't come with drama, it comes with peace, a kind of inner calm that doesn't depend on circumstances. The noise of needing to prove, to please, to perform it softens. Because now, you're no longer seeking validation, you're living from value. Approval no longer fuels you, presence does. You begin to feel when your energy shifts, not because someone said something, but because you noticed. You start to respond, not react. Where once you would lash out, now you pause. Where once you would retreat, now you breathe. And that pause, that breath, that's the self-reclaiming space where the ego used to rule. This isn't about perfection, it's about awareness. And awareness is not loud. It doesn't shout, look at me. It simply watches, holds, chooses. You no longer chase alignment, you embody it. You walk into a room and don't need to dominate. Your presence does the speaking. You listen more, you judge less. Because you're no longer measuring others through the lens of your own insecurity. You've stopped playing the character, now you're living the essence. And when the self leads, life doesn't become easier, but it becomes truer. You're no longer trying to escape yourself. You're finally walking beside yourself, shoulder to shoulder, as a friend. This is what awakening really looks like. Not louder, not shinier, just deeper. Not everyone will come with you, and that's okay. When the ego dies, your relationships don't always survive. because the people who are drawn to your performance may not recognize your presence. The ones who loved your mask might not know what to do with your face. But here's the truth. Connection after ego death is different. You no longer need others to complete you. You're not looking for someone to fix your brokenness because you've stopped believing you're broken. Love no longer comes from lack, it flows from overflow, and that changes everything. Your circle begins to shift, conversations deepen or disappear. Some people fall away, not because you stopped loving them, but because you're no longer willing to shrink just to fit. The old dynamics don't work anymore. The unspoken contracts where you played small, said yes when you meant no, carried their weight just to be liked are broken. You don't beg for love now, you offer it freely, and you receive it only where it reflects truth, not dependency. You stop asking, will they like me, and start wondering, do I feel like myself around them? And when you meet someone who's done their work, who doesn't flinch at your depth, who doesn't try to fix your silence, who doesn't fear your wholeness, something clicks, not in need, not in rescue, but in resonance. This is love after ego death. Not possession, not performance, but presence. It doesn't rush, it doesn't demand, it simply says, I see you, and I meet you here. You no longer fall in love to be found, you love because you've already found yourself, and now, anything less than truth feels like forgetting. You don't come back the same, you can't. After you've died to who you thought you were, after you've sat in the silence, met your shadow, shed the masks, you return, but you return changed. This is the part no one prepares you for. Not the descent, but the re-entry. You walk through the same streets, answer the same messages, sip coffee at the same café. Something's shifted. You're not chasing anymore, you're carrying. You used to look for meaning everywhere. Books, people, achievements, attention. Now, you don't chase meaning, you embody it. You walk with a quiet knowing, not loud but unmistakable, not needing to explain, not needing to prove. You're no longer performing for the world, you're participating in it, fully, authentically, freely. Life used to feel like something to survive. Now, it feels like something to express. Your presence becomes your offering, the way you speak, the way you move, the way you say yes and, more importantly, the way you say no. You're not trying to fit into life anymore. You're shaping it around your truth. You're no longer looking for the path. You are the path. And this is where the real journey begins, not in retreat, but in return. You bring your wholeness into the world, not as a banner, but as a way of being. The world hasn't changed, but you have. And because of that, everything does. So, what does it actually look like to live from the self? It looks like boundaries without guilt. You no longer say yes to avoid conflict. You say yes because it's true. And when it's not, you say now with peace, not apology. It looks like purpose, not pressure. You don't need a 5-year plan to feel worthy. You follow what lights you up, step by step, breath by breath, because now you trust your own inner rhythm. It looks like clarity over chaos, not because life stops being messy, but because your inner world is no longer ruled by confusion. You can hold pain without drowning. You can face uncertainty without running. It looks like compassion that includes yourself. You no longer abandon yourself to be loved. You no longer betray your truth for belonging. And you finally understand kindness doesn't mean self-sacrifice. It means self-respect. Yes, the ego still shows up. It still whispers, still tempts. But now, you see it for what it is, a voice, not a master, a reflex, not a rule. Because now, the self is in the seat, and the self doesn't scream, doesn't scramble, doesn't spin. It guides, it grounds, it chooses. You're not wearing your truth like a costume anymore, you're living it like skin. This is the shift, this is the freedom. You didn't become someone new, you returned to who you were before the world told you to be anything else. And now, every step you take from this place is sacred, not because of how it looks, but because of how true it is. Not all fire is meant to burn you. Some fire comes to cleanse, to strip away the excess, to melt down the false, so something true can emerge from beneath the ash. Transformation is not about losing yourself. It's about losing what you were never meant to carry, the personas, the performances, the pieces you adopted just to belong, to be good enough, to feel safe. And yes, it hurts to let them go, but that pain, that's the fire doing its sacred work. The ego doesn't die all at once. It dies in layers, in moments, in every breath you take, where you choose truth over image, peace over approval, depth over distraction. It dies 1,000 quiet deaths. And each time it does, something deeper, something real takes its place. But the self does not die. It waits, eternal, patient, undisturbed, beneath the rubble of who you thought you had to be. It has never asked you to become someone else, only to return to yourself, and in that return, you don't find perfection, you find presence. You walk through the fire, not to be reduced, but to be revealed. You are not your fear, not your shame, not your story. You are what's left when all that burns away. You are the silence that remains when the noise has passed. You are the clarity that waits beneath confusion. You are not lost, you are being reclaimed. So now, at the end of this journey, or maybe, finally, at the beginning of the real one, pause. Let the stillness hold you. And ask yourself, not with fear, but with reverence, what part of me is asking to be released, so something real can be born? Because the fire will come. That's not a threat, it's a blessing. The question is, will you let it refine you? Because you are ready, not to become someone new, but to finally remember who you've always been. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.